When stories of reconciliation cut across generations, they often leave an indelible mark on culture. And in gospel music, few moments in recent memory have carried the weight of Andria Johnson's tearful apology to Shirley Caesar. It was not simply a headline-grabbing encounter. It became a generational moment that held within it humility, forgiveness, reconciliation, and cultural healing on a scale that extended beyond a single stage. For those who have followed the trajectory of gospel over the past several decades, it was both startling and moving to witness. Before diving deeply into the layers of this cultural moment, welcome back, and thank you for spending time here again as we journey together through stories that shape faith and culture. Remember, while we're reflecting on this unforgettable moment, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss these deep dives into the stories that matter most. Andria Johnson shocked audiences with her emotional public apology to gospel legend Shirley Caesar, and what made it so striking was not just the words themselves, but the raw, unfiltered emotion that carried them. This was not a prepared press release or carefully curated PR stunt. It was a trembling, tear-streaked confession from a woman who had often been cast as a defiant outlier in a world where discipline and reverence were traditionally emphasized. Johnson had built her name on authenticity, on a willingness to show flaws and humanity in a space that often demanded perfection. And in this moment, with thousands watching and millions more eventually seeing the replay, she laid aside ego, laid aside pride, and simply said what so many rarely have the courage to say, "I was wrong and I'm sorry." It was a cultural reset, one of those flashes in history, when the sincerity of a single act carried implications far beyond the immediate circle of gospel insiders. The apology was shocking precisely because it cut through layers of expectation. Fans knew Johnson as outspoken, fierce, and unapologetic, and yet here she was stripped bare in a way that demanded attention not for the scandal of it, but for the humanity of it. To truly understand the significance of this apology, it is important to appreciate the backdrop against which it unfolded. The gospel industry, while a space of joy, worship, and inspiration, has long carried within it unspoken tensions between tradition and authenticity. For decades, the towering figures of gospel, voices like Mahalia Jackson, Albertina Walker, and Shirley Caesar, represented a standard of discipline, reverence, and a certain cultural responsibility. They carried themselves with a public grace that reinforced the message they sang. And while the younger generation admired them, they also wrestled with the pressures such figures created. Into this landscape walked Andria Johnson, a powerhouse vocalist who burst onto the scene with undeniable talent, but also with a rawness that sometimes scandalized traditionalists. She sang barefoot, with tattoos exposed, often addressing issues of pain, addiction, and struggle with blunt honesty. For older listeners and leaders, it sometimes felt like she was crossing invisible lines. Yet for younger audiences, it was precisely that authenticity that drew them in. Her apology to Shirley Caesar, therefore, was more than an individual seeking forgiveness. It was a collision point of years of rumored cultural and generational tension, a symbolic act that exposed the possibility of unity where division had long simmered. At the heart of the cultural divide stood Shirley Caesar herself, a woman whose name is synonymous with gospel tradition. Known as the First Lady of gospel music, Caesar has carried the mantle of discipline, tradition, and reverence for decades. Her presence on any stage carries a weight that is both musical and moral. She is a living bridge to an era when gospel was not simply about artistry, but about carrying the very fabric of the church's soul and song. For Shirley, gospel music has always been a ministry, not merely a performance, and she has guarded that ethos fiercely throughout her career. Her sharp discipline and unyielding respect for tradition made her both revered and intimidating. For younger gospel artists, her name was not one to be spoken lightly. To apologize to Shirley Caesar was to acknowledge not only a personal misstep, but also to step into the current of history, humbling oneself before a figure who represents generations of spiritual authority. That Johnson chose to direct her apology publicly, rather than privately, underscored how significant she understood this gesture to be. It was not just to Caesar as an individual, but to everything Caesar symbolized within the gospel tradition. And yet, Andria's raw style had always stood in deliberate contrast to such expectations. She was never the polished, perfectly poised artist who appeared untouchable. From her very beginnings, her journey was defined by messiness, vulnerability, and an insistence on showing her humanity without filters. It earned her a devoted following among those who felt suffocated by the pressure of church perfectionism. Her style clashed with traditional expectations, her attire, her speech, her willingness to admit failures openly. But it also resonated deeply with people who believed gospel music should meet them where they were, not where they were expected to be. This clash between Johnson's approach and the traditionalist perspective often created friction. Whispers of tension between her and some of the older gospel elite persisted for years, even when not explicitly named. So when she broke down and apologized, the gesture was powerful precisely because it represented a willingness to bridge a divide that had defined much of her career. It showed she was not abandoning her authenticity, but instead finding a way to honor tradition without erasing her own story. For fans, the apology was received not as a staged publicity stunt, but as a genuine act of humility. In an industry where cynicism often accompanies public apologies, where audiences wonder whether the words are carefully written by managers or strategists, Johnson's moment cut through because it felt unpolished, unrehearsed, and deeply personal. Viewers described watching with tears in their eyes, not because of the scandalous nature of her confession, but because of the vulnerability it demanded. People could sense sincerity, and sincerity, in the world of gospel, carries immense power. Fans rallied to her defense, noting that it takes greater strength to apologize than a hold on to pride. For many, the apology became a model of humility, a reminder that even public figures with immense talent and influence are still accountable to those who paved the way before them. It also offered a cultural lesson, that authenticity and humility can coexist, and that the most powerful testimonies often come not from victories, but from honest admissions of failure. What elevated the moment from emotional to iconic, however, was Shirley Caesar's response. With grace befitting her legacy, Caesar responded with compassion rather than criticism, choosing forgiveness and restoration over judgment. In doing so, she modeled leadership of the highest order. Where others might have dismissed or even scolded Johnson, Caesar embraced her as a daughter in the gospel family, emphasizing that forgiveness is a more powerful force than condemnation. Her reaction reinforced why she remains a revered figure, not simply because of her voice or her longevity, but because of the spirit she embodies. Caesar's compassion reframed the entire moment, showing that reconciliation is not only possible but beautiful when handled with grace. In many ways, her response was the final ingredient that transformed Johnson's apology from a personal gesture into a generational cultural event. Without Caesar's forgiveness, the apology might have remained a brave but incomplete act. With her embrace, it became a symbol of restoration. The role of social media in amplifying this exchange cannot be underestimated. Clips of Johnson's apology and Caesar's response circulated within hours, spreading across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, where millions engaged with the content. Hashtags emerged, debates unfolded, and countless testimonies from ordinary fans poured in. Some saw as evidence that the gospel industry was capable of healing deep divisions. Others reflected on how much the moment reminded them of personal relationships where reconciliation had long been needed. Social media transformed what could have been a private event into a viral cultural conversation, ensuring that the lessons extended beyond gospel insiders to broader audiences. The reach of this apology highlighted the way modern technology can carry spiritual lessons into places traditional church structures may not reach. In the digital age, moments of humility and forgiveness could become as viral as scandals, reshaping narratives of faith communities for global audiences. It was not only fans who responded. Gospel artists and leaders across the spectrum praised both women for their courage and leadership. Younger artists saw in Johnson's humility a model for how to honor those who came before, while veteran leaders saw in Caesar's response a model of how to embrace the next generation without alienation. In interviews and posts, artists noted how rare it is for such public exchanges of forgiveness to occur in an industry often defined by competition and quiet resentment. The praise underscored how deeply the moment resonated with those who live within the gospel world day to day. Leaders encouraged churches to take lessons from it, emphasizing that reconciliation should not only be celebrated when it happens on stage, but pursued diligently in congregations, communities, and families. In this way, the apology became not just a story about two women, but a touchstone for broader discussions about leadership, authenticity, and humility within gospel culture. Perhaps the most profound impact of the apology was the way it bridged generational divides in gospel communities. For years, there had been a sense that younger artists and audiences were drifting from the values and traditions held by the older generation. Johnson's apology and Caesar's forgiveness created a symbolic moment of unity. It suggested that the gap between authenticity and tradition need not be a chasm, but could become a bridge when humility and grace are present. Churches reported using the event as a teaching moment, highlighting the power of humility in reconciling differences across generations. Fans across ages commented that they felt closer to one another in celebrating the moment, recognizing that both generations had something valuable to offer. In this way, the apology was more than an isolated incident. It was a cultural reset that suggested the gospel community could move forward stronger together rather than fractured apart. Churches and fans used the event as a symbol of reconciliation and healing in ways that extended beyond the world of gospel music. Sermons referenced it, youth leaders shared it with their groups, and families discussed it at dinner tables. The simplicity of the gesture, an apology offered, forgiveness extended, reminded many that the principles at stake were not confined to artists and stages but applied to everyday life. Reconciliation between siblings, parents and children, congregants and leaders could all be inspired by the example set in this moment. Healing, it suggested, was possible even when years of tension had built up, provided humility and forgiveness were present. In a time when culture often emphasizes division, the event became a countercultural reminder of unity, showing that reconciliation is not weakness but strength. The takeaways from this moment extend far beyond gospel music. Genuine apologies have the power to heal strained relationships and generational divides, showing that humility can disarm even the deepest tensions. Forgiveness, as Shirley Caesar so gracefully demonstrates greater power than judgment or criticism, because it not only restores relationships but sets a model for others to follow. Gospel culture, and by extension Christian culture, grows stronger when authenticity and tradition meet, when the honesty of lived experience is married to the discipline of reverence. Viral moments, as this exchange proved, can ignite deeper cultural and spiritual discussions, proving that social media need not only spread scandal, but can also carry messages of healing. Ultimately, true legacy rests not only in music, but also in grace and leadership. Shirley Caesar's voice has carried for decades, and Andria Johnson's will continue to inspire. But it is the grace and humility they showed together that may become one of their most enduring legacies. As we close this exploration, the lesson resounds clearly. Humility and forgiveness remain some of the most transformative forces we can wield. They rebuild what pride has fractured. They restore where wounds have lingered. And they remind us that the measure of greatness lies not in our ability to stand above others, but in our willingness to kneel in reconciliation. If gospel music has always been about good news, then this was one of its purest expressions. The good news that grace still works, that forgiveness still heals, and that even across generations, unity is still possible. And with that, let me thank you once again for staying with this story until the end. If you found meaning here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can continue the journey with us through stories that matter, stories that inspire, and stories that remind us of the enduring power of grace.